Whether it's seismic or subtle, a full business model shift, or simply a change in how your team operates, a pivot puts ops at the center of everything. Every pivot has two separate timelines, the one on the roadmap and the one running silently in your team's heads, measuring how long before they know if leadership has this. That second timeline starts the moment the pivot is called. Whether it came from the founder, the board, the market itself, your team is watching to see if you know where you're going. They'll decide within days whether they believe you do. In that gap between the announcement and the moment they feel a steady hand on the wheel, people make assumptions. They protect their own priorities, they go quiet, or they go loud in maybe the wrong ways. By the time you've figured out your plan, you're already managing the fallout from the uncertainty you may have let sit for too long. Today, we're talking about how ops leaders take control of both timelines and lead their teams through a pivot like it was always part of the plan. Hi, I'm Penny Cook. I'm a fractional COO and strategic operations consultant, helping product and consumer brands install, upgrade, and run scalable operations and operational systems that reflect the founder's unique vision and ambition.
And I'm Sarah Wilson, also a fractional COO and turnaround partner for SMB. I help businesses struggling with the complexity and challenges within their operational core. I work with founders to install scalable, repeatable processes that unlock the ability to grow with the teams and tools they already have. Let's get into it. Penny, I really love this topic so much. When in operations, we're so often responsible for the nuts and the bolts of the everyday. And when there's uncertainty, and as there always is when it comes to things changing, just having a really solid plan really backs up our teams for success during the transition. So I'm passionate about this, and I'm so glad we're talking about it today. One of the first things we want listeners to go with today is communication. Communicate with your team even when you don't have the answers and even when the picture is still forming. The thing that we so often do is we hold back communication because it's not perfect. We don't want to say the wrong thing, but saying nothing is actually more detrimental in this scenario. When people aren't clear about what's happening to them or within their role, team, or department, they start telling themselves the story, and it's rarely anything helpful. It's important when it comes to that communication to really think about what level you're communicating. Frontline associates might have a different communication need than somebody within your executive leadership team. So it's always important to remember what level of role are you communicating with, and what are the communication needs of the different groups that you are sharing with.
You know, it's so true, Sarah, and it's so important the way leaders communicate, especially uncertainty. And amidst uncertainty, there is always a larger vision. Even if that larger vision is maybe a little blurry, there is a way to communicate it such that your team can start to understand what they need to do and own the execution of their role. And as a leader, that is the number one thing around communications that you need to do, is give them that blueprint and allow them to be able to apply that to what they need to do for their day-to-day.
Absolutely. And we want to make sure that there's really a flexibility in terms of the channel that you use. And actually, the channel you use is way less important than what you say. Sometimes people get really caught up in that communication piece, trying to get it right, trying to find the right channel, and they get kind of stuck on making that perfect. And we advocate that really matters less than the information that you're communicating. And all of that, ensuring that the communication is done well, it's addressed to the right audience, you're making that blueprint for your team, is all of that's going to result in the team feeling comfortable enough to move forward. Because when there's an absence of communication, people tend to freeze. So getting ahead of that and being really proactive with that communication allows things to move forward. And that's very key.
Yeah, it sets the foundation, right? It sets the stage. And now you need to give your team something concrete to work with. One of the most common instincts, I think, when a pivot lands is to treat it as a total reset, a chance to overhaul everything and start fresh. And people
Yes.
will start throwing pieces of the org, of processes, of product, of things that they feel like they've wanted to prune for a long time for whatever reason out the window. And that may not be the best approach when you really have a focused pivot going on. So, thing number two that we want to talk about today is know what to protect and know what to let go. We're not letting everything go in the middle of a pivot. We are letting the right things go to move to be able to achieve this new vision, whether it's a new launch, a new process, a new tool, a new position on the market, a new area that you're opening a market. Really think hard about what you have that can stay that's actually helping you and what needs to change, and be very focused, because while you're in the middle of a pivot and changing something, you want to hold as many things steady as you can to keep your team in familiar territory.
I really love that, Penny. The idea that incremental change is actually smoother and easier than a big swing from point A to point B. You can stack the change onto what's familiar and kind of build that picture together. You get to kind of step change instead of a big shift from one side to the other, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. And you can think about that through the lens of how much this is playing out in real time right now across almost every org with regards to AI. The pressure to adopt new tools, new workflows, new ways of working and thinking, and how that affects the outcome of what you're doing in your operations organization is, I mean, this shift is seismic. And the thing we would caution you from doing is changing everything up about your organization. If you're trying to make a shift to AI, think about where it really affects your organization and hold the other things steady so you're able to really make refined changes in that direction.
Exactly right. And the other thing to consider is what you put in writing. It's really a great idea to create simple guides to document what's changing, and within that communication, of course, what's staying the same.
What's
Because
not
that's
changing, right?
exactly what's not changing. And that really brings us to the third thing that's important during a pivot is realigning your organizational priorities around the pivot. So, like Penny's just said, it's defining what's changing and what's not and being really clear about that. But it's also changing the right things during a pivot to ensure that we're all functions lined up around the same priorities. So, what does that look like? That looks like ensuring that our performance metrics are lined up. So, are we looking at the same numbers? When possible, of course, what numbers are we no longer looking at? Because that's so often done where we speak to, here's another number we have to like we're if you're going to add a measure to start tracking, I'd definitely advocate finding one that needs to go so that we aren't looking in too many places when we're measuring our performance. And we also want to ensure that our recognition is lined up, i.e., we're now rewarding the right things during a pivot. And then also how our performance is rewarded. So if your compensation, for example, structure needs to change, that's another thing to realign. And then
Yeah,
finally,
Sarah. So aligning all of those metrics is the thing that's going to help cascade those changes through your organization evenly. And what happens when you don't? When half your org is on old metrics and half your org is on new metrics, or half your org has already planned how they're addressing the pivot and they're piloting things, and half your org is still on old processes, all of a
yes,
sudden you're clashing, and it's frustrating for everyone because work can come to a halt or people
absolutely.
can really get in each other's way. And during a pivot, when things are really critically changing for your organization, either in what your output is or how you're putting things out of your organization, you don't want there to be clashes. You want there to be absolute alignment. And as the leader of that organization, your ability to prioritize is the thing that's going to keep everybody in their lanes lined up with everybody as you move forward with the pivot.
Yes, and I really advocate to take that deliberate time at the beginning before we introduce a change. Sometimes it feels like we need to move fast because we're often reacting to a market change or trying to bring something to market quickly for really, really good business reasons. Take that time in advance to think through all of these things. It really increases your credibility as a leader if you can have some of the key things ready and figured out before the pivot. That reporting, for example, we talked about metrics, but even the way that we look at our KPIs, let's get those KPIs
Yeah.
not only decided on and aligned, but like which reports are we all going to look at? We're all going to review, and when what cadence do those get reviewed? So take that deliberate time. It feels a little bit slow at the beginning, but it will pay off when during this pivot you can confidently go to your team and your organization with here's what's changing, here's why it's important, and just getting very solid about that pivot in advance.
Yeah, it's such an important point, Sarah, because it will tell you as a leader, are things lined up the way I expect them to be lined up? Have I communicated really clearly, or are there some pain points? And those metrics should show you if there are pain points that you can then go back and either reset expectations. You can work with the managers to make sure that we're finding places that are still full of friction and solving those so we can move forward with the work. And as the ops organization, we sit in the middle of so many key functions for
We
the
do.
organization, for the larger company. We want to be clean in how we pull those off. So make sure you're communicating well enough so your people feel ownership, your rewards reflect the new direction, and the pivot stops being something that's happening to your org and starts being something that your org is leading confidently
Yes.
for the organization. And that starts with you as a leader. Pivot doesn't have to be a thing that destabilizes your team or derails momentum. The leaders who navigate them well aren't doing anything magical. They're really just working a playbook that they have earned with their teams.
Yes.
Communicate with your team. Communicate with your team early, honestly, and at the right level so everyone knows what's happening. Know what to protect and what to let go. And be open about what that list might look like because it may surprise you what that list looks like. It may not be the things that you assumed going into it. And realign your org's priorities around the pivot so the work, the metric, and the rewards are all pointed at the same target so your teams can be too. When these three things are in place, a pivot isn't a crisis, it's the clear next chapter of where your company is headed. This is exactly the kind of work that Sarah and I do with clients all the time. So if you're navigating a pivot and want to talk things through or you feel like you need some help, reach out. We're here. We're happy to have a conversation. We're happy to talk about how we could potentially help. You can find us on LinkedIn or through our website at operating-on-purpose.com. And if today's episode was useful, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode and share it with a colleague who might benefit from it too. The ops leader in your network navigating a pivot right now will also thank you.
Because great businesses don't just happen, they operate on purpose.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Penny. Thanks for
everyone.
listening, everyone. See you next time.